Welcome everybody to my podcast, Therese Makes History, the Dairy Lane Project, the lanes between Bomaderry to Berry in the Shoalhaven region of New South Wales. Our dairying pioneers' descendants are living still often in the lanes, and I'm engaging them, capturing the history of their families and dairy farming, which was the most prevalent 20th century primary industry throughout the country, and certainly Berry was active and at the centre of that industry. I'm a social historian. My name's Therese Sweeney, and we're in Season 2. My primary sponsor for Season 2 is Ian Zanstra, a very experienced dairyman on the other side of the river, from Piree. Season 2 would not be happening without Ian's support. I'm very grateful he stepped up. Thank you, Ian. Predominantly Jaspers Brush. So we're going north of the highway. We're getting to Berry, but we're not there yet, because today is episode 6. The Ison family. You would have seen Ison Lane on the highway before the bridge there that turns into Strong's Road. I'll talk a little bit about the heritage of the Isons. Henry Ison was born in November 1812 in the Thriplow parish, Cambridgeshire, in England. He married Mary Ann Triplow, who was born the same year, 1812. They married in October 1834 at St George Church in Triplow. They emigrated from England on the ship Steadfast in 1848 and arrived in Sydney, Australia on the 26th of March 1849. Henry had 9 children. He worked on the Berry estate, listed as a farmer and shoemaker. Of his 9 children, one was Robert Ison, which is the current living children's great-great-grandfather. Robert Ison was the son of Henry and Mary, and he was born in 1854 at Coolangatta Farm. His occupation was a gold miner and dairy farmer. He was the youngest child of 9. He married Alicena Rebecca Hollands, who was born October 1883. He married again in October 1893 to Catherine Justin. Robert had 8 children. In the New South Wales Gazette of March 1887, Robert is listed as the executor to Henry's will. Now, Robert's children, one of whom was Stan, which is the current Ison children's grandfather. Now, Stan was actually called Arthur Charles Stanley Ison, and he was born in February 1891 at Nowra Hill. So the family had moved to Nowra Hill at this stage. He married Margaret Pheobe Scott in 1923 in Kiama. She was born in December 1899. This is where the Ison journey begins, in Jaspers Brush, with Stan and Margaret, which will be expanded on throughout my discussion, with his granddaughter, Karen Ison. Now, Stan had 4 children. Stan had 4 children, the youngest being Alfred Ray Ison, known as Ray. Ray is Karen Ison's father. Ray was well known in the community, as was Stan. He married Valerie Susan Gall. Now, Valerie's parents were George Thomas Gall and Olive Adelaide McIntyre, and she was born in 1934. Ray's other siblings, in order of birth, was Una Mary, Ailsa Margaret, Kenneth Robert, and of course, Ray, Alfred Ray. Now, Ray died in 2021 and is buried at Berry Cemetery, as is his wife, who passed in 2013. They had 8 children, 7 girls, 1 boy. And you're going to hear all about it shortly. Today I'm engaging Karen Ison. She was born in 1957, and I hope you enjoy the recording. What is your former name? Can I ask that, and tell me who your parents are?
Yeah, so I'm an Ison from Jaspers Brush. So we're part of the bigger Ison family that came here, the Henry Ison family that came to the Shellhaven in 1850. My parents were Ray and Valerie Ison. My mum is connected to Jaspers Brush as well through the fact that the McIntyres and the Host families were 2 of the original farmers from Jaspers Brush, and she comes down from their line, making me, a descendant from Jaspers Brush on sort of both sides. The Ison family, that's my grandfather, Arthur Charles Stanley, always known as Stan, and his wife Margaret Pheobe. They came from Nowra Hill to Jaspers Brush to farm in March 1940, and they bought a farm, an existing farm that was there, known as Glenmore, and that's where we all were born. We grew up. I'm one of 8 children. A dairy farmer, had 7 girls and 1 boy. Not probably ideal for dairy farmers, the way it went in those days.
Do you know what year your father was born and where he was born?
He was born out at Nowra Hill, 1929. So he had 2 older sisters and a brother. And when they came to Jaspers Brush in 1940, so he was only 10. And then the oldest one was, I think, 15.
What about your mum? What year was she born?
She was born in Bury, the garage, the service station, the garage there. There's a house beside that. That's where she was born and grew up. A single child. She was there with her mum and dad, and her father was always the mechanic.
What street was that?
So that's in the main street on the highway there.
Is that the one that floods a bit?
Yes, beside the bowling club, near the bowling club there.
Was her father the original mechanic?
Yes. So he opened that garage there and worked there and employed a number of people around Bury.
And what was his name?
And so that was George Gore. George. So he come off the Gore farm. That's that farm down there near the hospital. That was a dairy farm there, and pretty significant Bury dairy farm as well.
Yeah, he didn't farm. He became a mechanic.
Yes. He was always a bit of an inventor. He always was interested in how things work and inventing things, always making. He built a car, built a motorbike. He used to race motorbikes and cars out on the 7 Mile Beach out there. And he was always into that kind of building his own stuff and doing all that. So he went overseas for a while and worked overseas. Then he went to Wollongong and worked in garages there, getting involved with Chrysler and other cars and different things. And then come back to the era later on as a mad Peugeot car salesman and fixer and mechanic and whatever. And he ended his life working as a mechanic on Mum and Dad's on the farm at Jaspers Brush. There, he put a shed on that and then was doing car mechanics and repairs right up to the end of his life there. Yeah.
I walk my dogs at the showground every, couple of times a day sometimes, and I go into Ray Ison's gate.
Yes, that's named after my dad. So that is the one, because as I'm saying, as from 15 he was in the junior farmers at the Bury show, and then it was on the board, so he never missed a show, and he was at all the meetings and the whole lot. So yeah, he was very, very, very much part of those. All the farmers were involved with the Bury show. He was very much had a say on things, had a view, and was on the board, and then was the chairman for a few years, and then continued. Well, he was there in his earlier days, like he might have been Stuart around the cattle, and then later on, his brother-in-law Don Barham, they took over running the bar at the show. They did that for many years, and then they went over to be gatekeepers, took over running and managing all the gates, which he did for 40 odd years. He did. So that was the gate Ray was always on, and so the Show Society recognised that in his last years while he was still alive, which was lovely for him, and he didn't know anything about it. It was a surprise they did that to honour him for all his years of working at the show, and he was still there. So he's had the gate named by the Show Society in honour of him, which was lovely.
As a young person, what were you all doing? Were you riding horses or what were you doing? Did you do any of that?
Still did have... My dad's brother Ken was the Ison family. They were good horse people and riders, and Ken absolutely loved his horses and was always involved with horses, and he was the ringmaster at the Berry Show with the red jacket on for most of his life. He was in it. Dad didn't have such an affiliation with the horses. He's seen that they spent a lot of money, it cost a lot of money, and I think he'd been ripped off by people with horses that always come and, can I leave my horse here, and never paid their bills. We did have horses as kids. We got a Shetland pony that came to visit from one of the uncles one day who brought it out, knowing that we'd fall in love with it. We all put our pocket money together, much to Dad's dismay, and bought this Shetland pony. It was called Sooty, so that probably indicates it had no white on it at all. It was black as anything. It was a typical Shetland that they're stubborn, and it gave us kids hell, but we had a lot of fun with it. But yeah, took you to the closest water trough or the closest barbed wire fence that it could to try and get rid of you. Dad was about the only one that controlled it. But it lived on the farm and stayed on the farm until it died when it was in, about 30. But we had a lot of fun with it. But that was in the days when we had a horse called Creamy and, the older. But as that, come the introduction of, we had a Jeep that they bought after the war.
A war Jeep?
Yep, a war Jeep, left-hand sided war Jeep. So once they had that, and then, gradually motorbikes and all the rest of your tractors and your motorbike, then they didn't have such a need for horses, and you had your dogs. We always had our red cattle dogs. Were not to be pets, definitely not to be pets. They came there as trained working dogs, and they were only meant to have one master. We were always getting into trouble for. We liked the dogs as well, but no, so they always had good trained working dogs, and that was essential. There was always horses on the farm left there, or can it have horses out there, just all different people, but yeah.
So can I just slow you down there? So your first memories, do you recall pre-mechanisation where you've got draft horses?
Creamy that was there was a draft horse. Don't recall them being used for taking carts. That was all before my time. So it was a generation before where they would have been using the horse and carts and the draft horses. So I remember them all talking about it.
What do you remember them talking about? Let's talk about, and who's talking about it? So
well, the grandparents, Dad and his sisters and brother, talking about going to school that way.
The Isons are quite a big family. Who are Ray's siblings?
Okay, so that was Una Ison, was his oldest sister, who married Don Barham, and so she's a Barham at Jaspers Brush. We always knew her as Peg, but her proper name was Arthur, Margaret. And he's the second one in the family, and that was his older sister again. She went away from Jaspers Brush in the 40s early. She went nursing, went to Wollongong nursing, graduated, went to Tassie, then went to New Zealand, travelled to America, Europe, everywhere, and then came back and ended up nursing in Sydney, the matron, came back to Berry Hospital, then went back to New Zealand, married a New Zealander, and came back to the Shellhaven as Peg Watson, and he was the real estate agent in Nowra. And so she spent all her life then in the Shellhaven after that.
What was his name?
That's right. And so that was Terry Watson.
When did they come back? What sort of era?
Late 50s, early 60s.
That's quite a big thing to do.
We look at that now and we just kind of think, wow, that was a female then. She was a very independent woman. She went off nursing, and then that was it. She travelled, she did all those things, and she was very independent. I think she studied obstetrics and became involved in one of the Sydney hospitals and then came back. So she was a very independent woman with a different view of the world and how it was. When she came back, married Terry and then came home with the two little girls, and he set up the real estate business here then. That's right, she didn't really work after that, but she was involved in lots of things. She had a much broader idea on...
Did she influence you at all? Like, was she? Did you admire her?
Well, we did, yeah, we did, because she looked at all that and you thought of it. And probably when you got older, because when you were younger, you weren't brought up to question things, but just to follow and do. And parents said, this is how, this and that. You just thought, oh, yeah, that was it. So it was not later till you got towards the end of high school that you'd started to, hang on. You encourage and your kids start getting independent views much earlier on than we did. You just thought, we always thought, my dad was always right and knew everything. But we looked at Peg, and then as you got older and then you grew up a bit and you look back and you understand how things, you thought, oh, yeah, she come and brought a whole different way of doing, and very modern woman with different thinking and different ideas.
Who's next?
So the two girls and then Ken.
And Ken liked horses?
Being a steward at the races.
Oh, so it's racetrack horses.
It was more that sort of thing that he kept riding for being a steward at the race days at Nowra and so forth, and then at the show. And he'd go to Sydney show and he was a steward at the show on the horse and the red jacket and the whole lot. So that was him. But yeah, look, he farming wasn't obviously for him. He didn't. He got out and did his own way and worked at the paper mill, the Shellhaven paper mill, which a lot of the men down here do. He spent all his life working there. He did shift work, and that gave him opportunities to explore his other interests and whatever and his skills, which he did. He was very handy with his hands. In those days, you didn't go to TAFE, you didn't do this, you just started and you did it, fitted and turning, whatever else.
An apprenticeship of some sort on the job.
And on the job, and away he went. He married a Berry girl, moved off the farm, and that was before Dad and Mum were married. Yeah, and so he'd already left the farm, gone to live in Berry, and he helped build the new house when Mum and Dad were getting married. And so he did a lot of building work, a lot of carpentry. He had lots of different interests and hobbies that come and went and changed. Chooks, he got right into chooks and showing chooks and all sorts of chooks. So that was one of them through a period of time. When they were at Nowra Hill particularly, they went to school with horses, horse and buggy to get them in and back and a whole lot. Earlier, probably when they first arrived to Jaspers Brush, they were probably still riding horses. There was a horse paddock at the school. The kids would ride in and tie up the horse, and the horse would stay there for the day, and then they'd ride home. And by the time I was born in 57, and things had started to change, and they had other means of getting around. Yep.
Do you remember things like chaff cutters and things?
Yep, we had a chaff cutter.
So let's talk about how that worked and what were you growing to chaff?
In my memory in my days, it was mainly saccharine and corn we were growing, and we definitely had chaff cutters. We had this massive shed that had big doors at the height of a platform, high enough for that, so that you'd back up to that, the tractor and the trolleys or the truck. You'd hand shovel all that off with pitchforks in, and then that'd go through the chaff cutter.
So you're saying you're storing whatever you're harvesting,
yep,
and then you're chaffing it.
And they're chaffing it, so it'd come in there and then it'd be chaffed and then it'd go and be fed to the cattle that way. That was those earlier days. Yeah, so it had a big chain on it that went round two different wheels. There was a spot, you shovelled it in, and out the other end it came out finer, and that'd go into that big trolley onto a platform. Then we'd pitchfork it into that to feed the cattle.
No accidents.
Yeah, so now when we talk about accidents, my dad was known because he was missing fingers. The day Gail was born, so that was in 56, he put a finger through the chaff cutter. A few fingers off, hands missing here and that. But
how did they bring in the crop? How did they harvest?
So in those earlier days, because we'd all help as well, and it was all hand. So we had another trailer that was low.
Oh, you had tractor or something.
Yeah, but a lot of it was hand. We'd go down and cut corn, and they'd be spending hours cutting corn. It was all by hand.
What do you call those things?
Yeah.
Sickle. How do you hand? Show me how you're doing
it. Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, you just... And we were the ones collecting it and putting it on more than doing the cutting. The men would do the cutting, but the kids were allowed to stack it all up and then get it on the trailer, and then it'd come and then it'd go through the chaff cutter, piled high. So in those days, because we got the railway line that ran through the farm, they leased the sides of the railway line, and we'd be able to they'd grow corn and everything along there as well. These days, obviously, they wouldn't, but yeah. So you'd go down there and spend all day cutting the corn and the succoline and whatever, but it was usually corn they grew along the railway line. Earlier, when they first came there, they did potato, and they did a lot of that at Nowra Hill, potatoes and peas, which they could sell to the market. They were growing, doing potatoes and peas at Jaspers Brush, I think, when they first come, but that not such hard work. Yeah, so there was a drainage system put in through the swamp to help when the floods were on and high tide and the whole lot, and so there was a drainage trust board that I remember my dad being on, because there was floodgates down there and they'd be in charge of managing and looking after all that, and I think that was a state government set that scheme up. I just knew that they had a system there with this, so that if it flooded, that they would shutter or close so that the flooding wasn't as bad, or when the tide were right, that it allowed them to drain out, that helped control some of the flooding on the swamp then. The gates are still there. The state government wound up the drainage, the trust and board councils took over management. The locals weren't involved in the drainage trust board anymore.
But your father was involved?
Yep. I know that the Davy File down there was the chair of it when it wound up at the time. Yeah, the 50s and 60s, that kind of was. The gates are still there.
I've always wondered now, the Isons and hardware.
Yes, so that is all the same family, because it was Henry Ison that came out here in the 1850s, and he came out and ended up working as the head stockman at the Coolangatta Estate. There was the big floods there and a lot of things got washed away. He was living out that way. He moved to what was called Saltwater Creek on the Shellhaven River and set up the family farm and moved the family to there. And that was right near Pulpit's Rock. Have you heard of Pulpit's Rock? Across from Bundanon, managed by National Parks, I think it is. Part of it's significant is Arthur Boyd painted it a lot. If you look at Arthur Boyd's paintings, Pulpit Rock shows up in that a lot. It is across from that property, and it was just right there where the Saltwater Creek came out to the Shellhaven River, and that's where he farmed. But they had a property, grandfather's father, and a lot of those had started farming at Nowra Hill. So they had farms there, and Stan Ison's father was Robert Ison. He was out at farming at Nowra Hill. When grandfather was born, he was only about 3 months old, his mum died. There was 4 children. He was then sent to live next door with the older Ison family, and they raised him for a while. Later on, Robert remarried. He went back to live with them and to have more children. But then Robert Ison died really young. So all those Isons, a lot of them around in the hardware. Robert's other brothers started the hardware, the Nowra hardware. But all the Isons around here, they're all related and all came from that same Henry Ison. We were the dairy farming stream, dairy farming, gold mining for a bit. Robert did some gold mining up at Yarwell. Never got rich from that. Obviously, Stan, when he came back from the war, he was injured at the war twice before they finally sent him home. And then he came back, got a job working for the gasworks, lighting all the street lamps and doing that when the lights in town in Nowra were gas. And then he went farming back at Nowra Hill again. He'd got married and had the children, and that's where my dad was born. So he'd become a dairy farmer again then, hadn't he? And then come to Jaspers Brush. Jaspers Brush was established through tenant farmers from the Berry Estate, and then they decided to, in the 1890s, to start and release some of that land and allow it to be sold. And so a lot of the tenant farmers then purchased it. Some of them didn't, other people got. But yeah, and that's what it all established, because they finally got freehold title, not straight from the Crown, but from the estate. And so that's on Mum's side of the family. That's the host. And then down Railway Lane, that was the McIntyres were tenant farmers there, and then eventually taking up some of those initial titles when it was sold. So initially it was all just farmers, everyone buying and farming, mainly to sustain a family. Yeah, and then like that 1890s to 1990s was so significant for the Shellhaven, for dairy industry and dairy farmers. Like that was, that was a major industry, and it shaped the Shellhaven because it was really one of the biggest New South Wales dairy industry areas and production. So, yeah, coming through as establishing a co-op. And
Okay, so we'll talk about your father, Ray, and some of the activities he was involved in. I know we've gone over a bit about the showground. What would you like to say?
Yeah, well, I think Ray, my father, I think he probably inherited that a bit from his grandfather Stan, who was fairly community-minded and involved. And so Stan, during his life and time at Jaspers Brush, at one stage he was served on the Berry Council before it became the Shellhaven, and he was an alderman on the council, and he was, I think, deputy mayor for a time as well, and that was in the 1940s. And Stan was also one of the early directors for the Nowra Co-op, the Nowra Dairy Co-op, and he was on there for 6 years, 1945 to 52. He was also the captain of the Jaspers Brush Fire Brigade and president of the school P&C. So he was involved and got involved in a lot of things, and was at war in the First World War. When he came back in the Second World War, then he got involved as a member of the Volunteer Defence Corps and ran the Meroo Jaspers Brush groups, the training people and helping the volunteers that were staying here and getting trained, and he did a lot of that. He also served on the Shellhaven Repatriation Committee for Returned Soldiers. So he was fairly active.
Do you remember Stan yourself?
Yes.
And what was he like?
He was a very gentle person and a quiet person. I think probably having gone through what he went through, like losing his mum when he was 3 months old and living, and then coming back and then losing his father when he was just in his teens, and then going to live with another auntie at Meroo for a few years and then going away. A lot of that would have shaped life for him. And then the war. And look, when I just remember him as a very gentle man, a caring man. I can never remember him ever raising his voice. Or at that stage, my grandmother was a pretty strong woman, and she probably wore the pants in that household and kept everything organised. And so he still had a love of farming, gardening, animals. Even though he'd stopped coming to milk in his later years, that was in his mid-70s, he still come down each day to feed the calves and check on the chooks, and so it was lovely. So, yeah, at home he'd been in his garden all morning, come in, had lunch and had a little lie down as he thought he would before he'd go down to the bales. Said he wasn't feeling that well. He never woke up from that sleep that day. Passed away in the sunroom, which was probably a nice way to go at the age of 70. I think in the community, well respected for being honest, hard-working farmer. And
he showed great leadership skills.
Yes, and I think that was it. That's what you're seeing, the ability to stand up, for what you believe, express an opinion, and, and make sure your voice was heard. And so my dad, I think, as he come and he, grew up and went through, he became involved in a lot of the same things. He, ended up captain of the Bushfire Brigade, president of the school P&C, involved in the P&C at primary, went straight to Bomaderry High, which had just opened, and he was involved in, heavily involved in the P&C and chair of the P&C at high school. Did a lot of advocating and did a lot of the work around getting the Shellhaven High built, fighting to get Shellhaven High built and things like that. So
is that now called Nowra High?
No, Nowra High was the first high, and then Bomaderry High came, and so he was involved as a member of the Jaspers Brush P&C, then getting Bomaderry High up and running and built, and then later on, as that grew, Shellhaven High. Education was really important to Dad, I think, because he grew up in a time and he left at 15 to work on the farm, and he just said none of us were going to be leaving school till we finished the high school certificate. That's what he stood by, and I think we all went through and did the high school certificate. Like his father, he was very involved with the dairy industry and the dairy factory, and then he spent 12 years there as a director from 76 and right through, elected as the deputy chair and then elected as the chair, what was the Nowra Dairy Co-op at that stage. So he was around and involved when they fought for a merger. They fought against a lot of takeover bids. They worked with other co-ops to try and get an amalgamation, and they amalgamated the Meroo factory. In 1984, the Meroo and the Nowra co-ops, they actually officially amalgamated and created the Shellhaven Dairy Co-op. They only become the first chair of the first board for the new Shellhaven factory. All through that era of change. At the same time was involved in the cooperative society, was involved at a high level and on the board and did trips overseas and so forth. So he was part of the board and go to Sydney regularly for meetings with the cooperative society. He very much was a believer in cooperatives. I don't know how he managed to be a farmer, getting up at those hours in the morning, coming home and then rushing off to so many night meetings. Later in the 80s, he was up and down to Sydney continually for meetings. But yeah, he was another one who believed in what he, standing up and being counted for your opinions, but he also believed very much in doing your homework. That's what he'd say. Don't ever speak until you've done your homework. Do all the research, do the homework, get both sides of the story, then form your opinion, and then speak, and then stand up for what you believe in. So that was kind of what he always told us as kids, and we've seen that demonstrated time and time. And another thing, part of it was, you're not always going to agree with one another. So you're going to stand up and speak, and a lot of people in the room may not agree with you. When you walk out the door, then that's it, you leave it there, and then you continue with your friendships. Everyone's right to have a different opinion on things, so he very much fought for a lot of that. So he was doing that at the same time when he was the chair of the Berry Show Society and attending a lot of those other bigger events and being involved in that. But he was very much committed to that. So when he wasn't farming, he was spending time attending meetings and you know, trying to make sure those things that were important to him were progressing and going in the right direction. So yeah, very much a fighter for the Berry Show to continue to be an agricultural event and not get taken over and dragged off in other directions just to be more profitable or more exciting. Continuing to have the show where it demonstrated the dairy industry, you know, the agriculture.
So thinking about your siblings, could you name them all for me and where you went to school?
So, because there's a few of us, so Sue was my older sister, born in 54. So Sue, then Gail, then myself, I was number 3 in the family, then my brother Michael, and then there was Janet, then Leanne, then we had a little bit of a gap, and then there was another 2 more surprises. So we had Tracy and Nicole, and that's the 8 of us now. As the older ones, we all went to Jaspers Brush Primary School, so we'd walk or sometimes get driven, but mostly go up in a jeep maybe, but mostly we walked all through the paddocks, and as most of the kids did, they just walked to school. Near Jaspers Brush Creek, where the bridge is, just before you come over the bridge to go down to Railway Lane. It's called Jaspers Brush Lane these days, but yeah, so that was between those two lanes there on the highway.
Was the teacher there a while, or?
Earlier on, Mr. Hunt had come and then Mr. Punch. So most of us went through with Mr. Punch. The school closed because the numbers were dropping. Go through that wave, and it was before all the farms started to get sold and subdivided, and lots of other kids come to town and whatever, come to live in Jaspers Brush, but it was that era. So numbers were dropping right down, and so then my brother, the younger ones, all went through Bomaderry Primary once the school closed and that. So that's...
in the 60s?
Yeah, 68 I think that was, yeah. And so once that they moved there was a bus that used to take them, pick them up on the highway, and we'd go to high school on the bus as well. So once we all went to high school, there was a bus that, ran from Berry to Bomaderry High.
When you're thinking about where you are in Ison's Lane and you're thinking about how the landscape looked, I imagine there were a lot more silos in that landscape.
Oh, yes, there were. There were a few, most of the farms. And the concrete ones tend to still be there, some of them, and a lot of the others then were the metal silos or whatever that were put up later on. But yeah, for Jaspers Brush, there wasn't as many silos as Far Meadows, some of the other areas around there, but there's still a few of them that you can see around.
And you're going into Meroo Meadow to school. What did it look like on the left there of the highway?
Well, again, it was just all dairy farms either side, really, and the little Meroo school and the little church there. But basically, it was just cows and paddocks. It was all dairy farms right through there in our earlier days. Through from Berry, yeah. It's changed quite a bit now.
So tell me about your farm, just brief.
Yeah.
Your dairy farm, how big was your dairy farm?
Well, so they bought... It was about 240 acres when they first came there, when Stan bought that, Glenmore, known as Glenmore. So that was a little bit on both sides, so both sides of the highway there, and went down and had the swamp in it, and then a little bit up where the Ison Lane is. They had some property up there. And when my father was getting married in 53, so a new house was built on the farm for his parents, for Stan and Marg to move into, and that was built on the highway on the other side, just where Ison's Lane meets the highway now. So they moved into that, and Dad stayed in the house he was raised in, and family home, and Mum moved in there, and that's where we all grew up, in that house. Ison Lane only come about recently, so in those days it was directly on and off the highway. And these days, just after this last lot of works, where the overpass and the bridge is, then it's become an offshoot of Jaspers Brush Lane, and it runs down to there. So it's sitting in the same place in the last few years. It's all been redone up because my sister owns it and her husband. So the original house still sits there. So it's about 140 years old now, and from what we understand, 120, somewhere around that age. And it's had a few modifications over its time, but it's just been completely redone up there. So that's the
original dairy cottage, is it?
That's the original homestead, yep.
So did you have electricity growing up? And
in my times, yes, I can remember we had no hot water, but we had electricity. So the hot water came from the fuel stove, so for cooking and everything, it was always the fuel stove, so that had to go 24/7.
What was the fuel?
Wood.
Wood fire.
Yep, wood. In the bales, of course, they had a copper there because they needed boiling water to wash things down and clean up and sterilise all the milk cans, etc. At the end of milking, Dad would bring a can of hot water up and throw that in the bath, and then all the kids, one after the other, in together, and one after the other, and then we'd have a bath each night that way. But that was the only hot water we had in the house, is what he brought up after milking, or what came off the top of the fuel stove in the kitchen. Yep, and that was it. So that was the early days, and for washing, which so many of us, that would have been fun for Mum, because she just had the old copper type down in a laundry, a separate thing.
Which was quite dangerous, wasn't it?
Well,
some people, I know some women were burnt to death and things from the hot water.
And not fun. I remember that early changing and the excitement. The washing machine that had the two ringers on the top. That was heaven, they thought at the time, and now you look at it and you think, that's why washing took so long. Housework those days was a full-time job.
Sticking with that, what was your mother cooking? Like, did she have to cook everything?
Yep, in those early days that was it. So they'd be up from early in the morning, and the guys were working outside in the farm, and then they'd just spend all their time doing housework, preparing meals, cooking, cleaning, getting up, and she used to make our clothes as well. So she'd be often up to midnight and past midnight, sewing clothes and making clothes, etc. A long day's work for both the farmers out in the paddock as well as the women inside. And my grandmother used to cook a lot. She'd be up, early in the morning, cooking biscuits every day and all that, because they'd make sure that they needed to have morning tea and afternoon tea before they went to milk as well. You'd be finishing breakfast and then getting ready for morning tea, getting ready for lunch, getting ready for afternoon tea, and then the dinner.
And what were you taking to school to eat? Was it sandwiches? Or
there was none of that. So you'd have the hot milk, the milk that'd get left there, but the P&C guys, they bought an ice chest that'd be left at the school gate so that the milk could go in there. So the big block of ice would come each day to try and keep the milk chilled. The fruit and Vegemite peanut butter sandwiches and that sort of thing mostly. Then the milk that always was delivered to all the schools in those days. The milk would come in little glass bottles with the foil tops on it in my day.
Just exploring the house a bit more. Because, I mean, I come from a large family too, and we had hot water because it was urban, on the fringe, but urban. And we'd all get in, there'd be three of us in the bath. There'd be no, there was no dramas. We'd all be in the bath,
That's exactly how it was. We never thought about, you don't think about, what's normal.
No.
You don't question, and that was it. There were so many, and it was, there was a routine every day, and then once the can of water, hot water, been in, and it was right.
Yes.
You bunch in the big ones to the next ones, and then some out and some in, and some coming out getting dressed in nappies on and whatever, and then after that Dad'd usually have a bath, and that was it. Now, I'm not sure about where Mum fitted in to get her bath, because she was in there organising dinner and whatever.
Yeah. So with her supplies, you had chooks, did you?
Yeah, my grandfather loved his garden, and he loved his chooks and fruit trees and whatever. So
what was he growing?
Oh, look, I think when they had their property out at Nowra Hill, I think he grew everything, not just the normal run-of-the-mill apples and oranges kind of stuff. They had everything, and they used to do a lot of bottling and a lot of preserving. Then grandfather, established a similar, but not to the same extent, but there was a lot of apple trees, orange trees. At Jaspers Brush, it was only mainly for himself, or that people had swapped things, but they do a lot of preserving with a lot of the stone fruits and whatever they had there, doing the veggie gardens, like he had a massive veggie gardens. And it was all just to sustain their family, and you might swap with neighbours and so forth. And then the chooks, grandfather always, loved. So we always had chooks and the eggs and the whole lot. So that was his, as he kind of retired from milking and getting too hard in his 70s for the milking. In the later years, he'd still come down to feed calves and collect the eggs and make sure the chooks were right and sorted out and that sort of thing.
Do you know what types of chooks? Did he show them at the shows?
No. That was one thing our family never did. Dad, they were heavily involved in the show, and the berry show, particularly my dad, until just when he was about 90. They didn't go in for, registered cattle, and they had to be registered cattle to be showing. They never got involved in that side of it, but was always there as a steward. It was probably about where they fitted in that with terms of financial
money.
It was all about money. They didn't have a lot.
So thinking about the cows, how many cows were being milked in the types? Were they Frisians? Were they Illawarras? What were they?
We were Frisians, our farm, always the black and white, but you always mixed a couple of others in there for cream, Jerseys and the Guernseys, and so you had a few of those all mixed in amongst, but 90% was the Fresias for milk supply.
How many were you milking?
When they first were farming there, and in the early days, I think it was around the 60, and a lot of it was dictated a bit by your milk quota, the size of your property. So with Dad there, and over time, once he got married, of course, he was getting married in 53. Just after that, then he became a share farmer with his father. In the 60s, a little bit further down the track, they entered into a partnership arrangement, registered the business name for the farm in the name of ACS Ison and Son. So they worked under that partnership agreement right up then. Then around 67, so they had an opportunity to buy the farm next door. That was Davis's farm, known as Dawning. At that stage, it was just being leased out. The Walker family were living there and farming it, but the Davis farm, then it was in an estate, had to be sold, and that was purchased by Mum and Dad in their name. So in 67 that was, so they owned that.
And what sort of money are they paying, and how big was that property?
Yes, I think it was around 170 hectares that they got to add to it. I'm not sure what money they were paying for it.
So that's quite an expansion.
That gave them, because that's it, you needed bigger, and it's the quotas that they needed, a bigger quota and the whole lot. So that gave them an opportunity to grow, and so then, they grew it, and it was more getting up towards the 80 head.
Because when they're buying property with the milk quota system, they're getting the milk quota attached to the property.
Generally, that's how it works, yes. So during Mum and Dad's time, grandfather's time there, they actually had what they called a dry run. So grandfather had bought in the 40s a property at Guatemala, up here at Berry. So they had that, and for the quota. And then they had an opportunity to buy his old farm back at Nowra Hill. Guatemala got sold, and they bought that back, which helped them because that gave them a quota and extra land.
How big was that
one?
That
helped. So it was probably that similar sort of 150 or so acres there that they had. Then when they got the opportunity to buy Dawning, the Nowra Hill property was sold as well. So then they had the two properties there combined, and they combined all that to one farm, one business. By the time when they finished, and my brother and my dad were farming together after my grandfather passed away in 71. And then in the 1980, my brother had finished university. He'd be doing ag out at Wagga and come back onto the property with Dad. And then they were able to start to have another look at how the business was operated, make it a bit more modern, increase the herd again. And in that time they bought a property at Meroo, known as the Shepherds, the Shepherds farm. It was just the Shepherds. So that was down Meroo Road, down Hannigan's Lane, a dry run, I suppose, more space. Yeah, so on the bales then they redeveloped, because the bales on the farm, 6 bales, so that's pretty slow milking. And in those days, the way it was done, we had a really big shed on the property just near the bales with cattle stalls in it, and in between 2 rows of cattle stalls there was a sunken pit with a trolley on railway tracks. Put all the silage, the hay, whatever would go in, and we'd go through and fill up all the cattle stalls. We'd feed, the cows would come in and be fed first before they'd go to be milked. That's why milking was such a long process. When grandfather had first bought and Dad was milking, that was the thing. We'd have to go down there and help, fill up this trolley that we'd push up and down in between the stalls.
Quite a good system, really.
It was great. And
yes.
Above it there was a loft full of hay. So you had kind of 3 levels. Yeah, there was a storage level here, and then on railway tracks.
Yes.
In this trolley that we'd push up and down, and then you'd fill it up with feed. And as the cows come in, you knew personally, like you knew every cow. They had a name, and you knew the cows. And so then they had, depending what cow it was, what stage of their milking when they were at, whether they were pregnant, this one had to get this much pollen, this one had to get this much bran, this one had to... So you just knew, you had a list and you'd go through, and then once the cow was in, you gave it its additional supplement of feed based on what cow it was, who it was at, whatever. So when that was all over, then they'd go into the yard and then they'd start milking. And in those earlier days, there was only 6 milking stalls.
So it was a walk through, 6 bales.
Walk through, yep. And come in, leg rope, whatever ones you needed to, down on the stool underneath with a bucket, and away you wash, clean them and whatever, and then we had electric milking.
So the cups, you'd put the cups on?
The cups on, yep. Had to work out which ones had mastitis or this or that, or had cuts or whatever that you had to treat, and all the rest of it. And there was a process, but they were just being fed, separate from being fed. Then in about 81, I think, they renovated the bales and made them 8. And they also then become feeding stalls at the same time. So then they built a silo at the bales, and then you were able to start to feed and milk the cows at the same time, which saved a lot of work and a lot of time. We ended up with Dawning. What came with Dawning was another house, and so Michael lived in that house. So they're both on the swamp side, the 2 houses. And when they, then in the 70s when Michael come home, as I was saying, they'd improved the other, they actually built new herringbone bale, a new design, and Michael designed and did all that. He did it different than the traditional. They were about 10 aside and with the pit, which made milking a lot easier, a lot safer and more, enjoyable for farmers and the cows, and they could get through a lot. So they got their they're up to about milking 120 head. Important milestones was when they moved to the bulk milk collection system in the 60s, the mid-60s there, where everybody changed over from factory cans and having collections after every milking to installing the milk vats, the big milk vats that was all through a refrigerated system. And then that meant the milk only had to be collected after, every second day. So we went to that system. So that was a big change. Then there were the big tankers. You had to upgrade your access roads and the dairy to make sure that they could get in and out safely and turn around. And you had to add this vat room to your bales and do all that. So that was a big expense for farmers and a big change for whether they got loans or financial assistance to help do that. But I think in that they were buying the vats and putting them in. So that was all part of the process.
So were you upgrading the roads and paying for those costs?
From my memory, yes, yeah, the farmers just had to upgrade all that stuff, but it made the work a lot easier. So in the bottom of the vat, there was a little plug right at the bottom, the lower point, and then a hose would come off the truck. They'd attach it to it.
Did you ever go in the milk truck?
We did, yep. So that was Johnny Mitchell. His father did it before him. Depending on what day of the week or where it was or what time or how much time he had, he was happy to throw us in with him. So after it left our place, then they'd go down Railway Lane and Strong's Lane, and then he'd drop us back on the highway on the way past as he was heading the other direction back to the factory. So yeah, we'd often, and I don't think he minded bringing us, because then he'd get us to do, we could roll all the empty cans off, because that's what he'd do, bring back the empty cans, and then he'd put your full ones on. So we were there always helping get the empty cans off as he was getting the full ones on. And so once that changed over, then I think those contractors were probably given some compensation and paid out of their contracts. And
so were you going to Berry for your supplies, or were you going to Nowra as a family?
So as a family in those days, that was all delivered. Mannells in Berry, they owned the shop where the IGA basically is now, the grocery shop. You rang through your order and it was delivered onto your kitchen table. You rang through your meat order, that was Darryl Atkins, the Atkins book, and it'd be delivered. Your bread had come, the Brandons deliver the bread. All that would be delivered, so you just ring in your order and it'd all be delivered. And that was in the earlier days. Then it was later on as they stopped doing that, once I was in high school age, more than before Mum had a licence. And then when we were young, she never had a licence, but she got a licence later on. We never had a car. When we were kids, there was grandfather owned a car and we could borrow it to go to church on Sunday.
And what church did you attend?
So we all went to the Presbyterian. My mum was a Presbyterian. The Isons were strong Methodists. Dad married a Presbyterian, so it wasn't a Catholic, so that was
I know, I mean, us poor Catholics. But it's interesting, isn't it?
There was that divide, because the Catholics in Berry had their own school as well. Tended not to mix with the Methodists and the others, the Church of England and the...
Yours were the dominant churches, weren't they?
Yes, it was the Methodist Church of England and the Presbyterian.
It just went with the settlement.
Yep, and when they married, because Dad became a Presbyterian, went to the Presbyterian Church, and that was it. That was all okay. Yeah. So we always went to the Presbyterian.
Did you go to
Church.
Sunday school?
Went to Sunday school, and Gussie Miller.
Tell me about that.
Gussie Miller, who's still alive. Yeah. So he was always very much in our minds. We all would have had Gussie Miller as a Sunday school teacher. Yeah, I did some Sunday school teaching for a while there too, high school days, and then just as I left and went to work and everything, then that all kind of stopped. For Jaspers Brush, the core community asset there was the school, the Jaspers Brush School. Like I think in the earlier days there was a School of Arts hall there.
You don't remember the railway station?
Yes, I do. Yep. I do remember the railway station.
Do you remember what sort of trains were they steam?
Yeah, they were still all that steam and diesel.
Did you get the train
diesel
there?
Once or twice we did, in the very early days when we were little, or we met people there that got off. But by that time, the train wasn't stopping at Jaspers Brush unless you booked or rang. That's what it went to. That if you wanted to stop there, you had to go and, organise that or go in with the guard or get them to stop. So most people... It had transitioned out, so you'd go to Berry. In the early days, I know my dad talked about, when they'd go on the train, well, you'd just ride with the guard, and then he would, if there was nobody else to get off at Jaspers Brush Railway Station, they'd drop him at the railway gates on our farm and just let him off and let him jump off there and whatever. But that was the earlier days. But yeah, so in those days, they stopped, and by the time I was high school, it was just not on the map at all. It was gone and they closed it, and then they finally removed it all.
When you were living in Jaspers Brush, was it mainly Presbyterians, or was there it
was a mix. It definitely was a mix. When I went to school, it was a little bit dominant because the Matthews up the lane had 6 children, and we had 8. So, and we both were the Presbyterian, so that probably added a few Presbyterians in there. But there was definitely a mixture of Church of England Catholics. The Harrises were there, they were Catholics, and they came to the school until they went to high school. and then they'd send them to the Catholic school. Yeah, so we had a bit of a mixture, and at school you never even thought about it. Really.
No, that's right. But it's interesting. Was there any Jews or any? And was there?
No, so that was the thing. There was, might have had an Aboriginal child there occasionally, just when they were staying with somebody or something else was happening, or they might have had family, might have been in the area doing some pea picking or whatever for them. So there were some Aboriginal children that go to the school, but usually just for a part of a few months or a month or so, that sort of thing. On that were just all the farmers' kids. And
yes.
Usually, our big memory of this is Jimmy Little. Jimmy and his sister used to come and stay with the Johnson family down Railway Lane. And he came and sung for us at the Christmas tree event one year, our end of year and our Christmas do at the end of year. And he come in and he sung Telephone to Glory. And, you just remember that. We didn't, realise.
Great song.
We never realised how big a person, whatever. There's just, the Johnsons have got, Jimmy and Betty staying with them again, and they come along, and it's great, yeah. But they were very involved in church, and it was part of just what they did, help looked after. But
Yeah, okay.
Special memory because she just had your normal. Our Santa was Johnny Strong from up the road, but Santa would always come in. You'd have Christmas and we'd do that, and we'd do a bit of dance and whatever else, but we'd get our book as a prize for the year, and that was usually it. You all took home a book with the little sticker in the front with the P&C sticker in it, which we still got some of those, but and that was it. But that was a special when he came along.
And what was John Strong like?
Everybody remembers him as being an unusual, a different sort of farmer. Not so conventional, because he'd come home and he'd be up ploughing up the paddock at 2 a.m. or getting the cows into milk in the dark and whatever. So to be one of his cows would have been an interesting life, I think, because they'd be milked whenever I think it was time and whatever. So he'd be getting in cows and milking at weird times, or he might only milk them once a day. Everybody just remembers him as being,
a bit unorthodox.
Yeah, he didn't do it the same as everybody else. He was a little bit different. I think he was a very big part of the community.
So let's talk about how Ison's Lane got registered as a lane.
Yeah, so that's right. So, with the farms, as I said, had grown up from one property to 2, got bigger, and then, Dad and his father farmed it, and then he passed away, and then Dad had, we had a few milkers working, but once Michael came home, then they had the partnership, and they were building the farm up. And then it got to a point there was a lot changing, dairy deregulation and the whole lot. And the other big thing that happened in the Shellhaven for a lot of farmers, the value of their property had gone through the roof. So to buy more land to dairy farm was becoming expensive. Dad's now in his 60s, and Michael, so they either had to get bigger or get out. I suppose that was it. So there was decisions to be made. They'd gone through a few wet winters. My brother talks about 100 days of rain, milking cows, but they needed more land. They needed to either get bigger. Anyway, the decision was, and I think that was in about 98, I think they stopped farming. Michael retired and he went off to work for the Department of Ag at Gloucester, and Dad stayed on the farm and retired. So, of course, with all that come with you've got all your assets and everything tied up in land. Part of that was to then consolidate titles between the 2 properties that they owned, Dawning and Glenmore. They consolidated all those titles, took Dad's house block off, and it became a residential zoning block, which was allowed. It was being encouraged by planning at that stage, new planning laws and with state planning laws and council LEP rules, etc. So they consolidated a lot into one larger farm, which they were trying to do. He got that off, and then on that other side, western side of the highway where Nana's house was, then they were able to take 3 1-hectare lots off. That's when Ison Lane was constructed, or an access road was constructed. It's a private road, it's not a public road, in about 2005. Those lots were sold around 2000, so that gave Dad, Mum retirement money to live on now that they weren't farming. and allowed them to stay on the farm and keep the majority of the farm. Yeah, in 2005 they just went through the process. One of my sisters organised all that, went through the process with council and the Geographic Names Board of having that lane named Ison Lane, and that's named in memory of my grandfather, A.C.S. Ison Stan, because his house was on that side, so that was named Ison Lane. So it's probably the newest lane for your project. It's probably, and it's not a public road, so that's how that came about. There's just the 3 blocks up there. The house that was on that side with it, my grandparents, when my parents got married at that same time, and that's where the new house was built. That was built by Stan's son Ken, Ray's brother. He built the majority of that house for them, and they lived there. You know, he lived there till he passed away, and my grandmother, Margaret, she was there until about 3 years before. In about 92 she moved off the property, and then 94 moved into aged care. Was only there a couple of years before she passed away in her late 90s. She did well. She lived, yeah.
What was her secret?
Well, I think it's again, they brought up pretty tough, and they just had to, and they lived through wars and they did the whole lot. They were pretty resilient. She worked from 5 in the morning to late at night, and they grew everything. She cooked everything, ate well, all alive, and she remained pretty healthy all her life.
That brings us to the end of the recording. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, we're moving through this Dairy Lane project, aren't we? Season 1, 10 episodes. Season 2, number 6 episode, big tick off, done. After Christmas, I'll bring you episode 7. Thanks for listening. Spread the word. For some reason, there aren't as many people listening this season. I want you to make an effort. Put it out there. Jaspers Brush is incredibly interesting. All right, thanks for joining me. Take care and have a safe, spiritual, enjoyable, drama-free Christmas. Fingers crossed.